The Whistler 101 Sessions, a series that seeks to inform, educate, and inspire. Whistler 101, what do you know?
Hi, I'm Christina Swern, biologist, nature interpreter, and longtime volunteer with the Whistler Naturalists, and I'm excited to introduce to you the amazing biodiversity of Whistler. Along the way, we'll see how all things in nature, including us, are connected. Biodiversity is a word used to describe the diversity and complexity of natural systems. We'll start by looking at why it's important. It's biodiversity that makes it possible for nature to provide a wide range of goods and services that we can't survive without. Things like air, water, food, medicine, pollination, and climate regulation. We also know that immersing ourselves in nature has health benefits, and that Whistler's beautiful natural setting is a big reason people live and visit here. Biodiversity is also a form of life insurance. It's been said that species are to ecosystems what rivets are to a plane. Losing one might not be a disaster, but each loss adds to the likelihood of a serious crash. So the question is, how many species can we lose before ecosystems that support us stop functioning? Because we don't know, protecting biodiversity ensures our own survival. There are 3 levels to biodiversity. The broadest is ecosystem diversity, which in Whistler ranges from valley wetlands to the high alpine. Within ecosystems is species diversity, and within a species is genetic diversity, the variability that helps a species adapt to a changing environment. For instance, the smaller the population of a species, the less genetic diversity it carries, making it more vulnerable to threats like climate change. Of these 3 levels, the foundation of biodiversity is ecosystem diversity, which in Whistler is influenced by 2 main factors. Whistler is close enough to the coast to be on the eastern edge of British Columbia's temperate rainforest, part of the largest temperate rainforest in the world. But it's also far enough from the ocean to be in a transition zone between the cool, wet coast and the warmer, drier interior, which means species from both climates can be found here. The second reason behind ecosystem diversity is Whistler's mountain landscape. Colder temperatures at higher elevations are a major factor in defining where things can live. BC uses a classification system that groups areas with similar vegetation, soil, and climate into zones. More zones mean more biodiversity, and Whistler has 3. Whistler Valley is in the rainforest zone, where western hemlock and other temperate rainforest trees are abundant. In the mid-mountain snow forest zone, mountain hemlock replaces western hemlock and joins other tree species that can withstand high elevation weather. Highest is the aptly named no forest zone. Although some tree species are found above the so-called tree line, the harsh climate here keeps them looking like shrubs. Naturally, ecosystem diversity has a big influence on the high species diversity in Whistler. And here's an interesting note. Whistler is actually at the forefront of biodiversity inventories across all of BC. In 2004, local biologist Bob Brett started the Whistler Biodiversity Project. The goal was to provide decision makers with data on local biodiversity to help guide development and protect important habitat and species. Bob also helped found the Whistler Naturalists, a volunteer group that organizes events like BioBlitz, Fungus Among Us, and bird surveys that all collect biodiversity data. When the project began in 2004, just over 400 species had been documented. Now, due to the work of researchers, naturalists, and citizen scientists, over 4,300 species are known in Whistler, with roughly 100 new additions to the list each year. Now, here are some of those species up close. Biologists organize species with similar characteristics into kingdoms and other subgroups. I'll start with the plant kingdom. All life on Earth relies on the ability of plants to transform the energy of sunlight into sugars and oxygen through photosynthesis. Plants fall into two major groupings, vascular and non-vascular. Vascular plants, which have the ability to transport water and nutrients great distances, can grow large, and the biggest vascular plants are trees. In the forests around Whistler, you can find 12 types of evergreen and 4 types of deciduous trees. This diversity protects the forest from threats like disease. Compared to humans, trees are very long-lived. Forests in Whistler that haven't been logged are considered old growth, and their trees are generally older than 300 years, in some cases up to 1,300 years. Old growth logging began about 100 years ago and unfortunately continues today. In areas that have been previously logged, which includes the majority of Whistler's valley bottom, trees are mostly 50 to 70 years old and known as second growth. Whistler's Old Tree Map is a great resource to learn more about where these exceptional old growth trees still stand. Old growth has higher biodiversity than second growth because of unique characteristics. High canopies, deep soils, and large, widely spaced trees provide room for wildlife, like the endangered northern goshawk. Another feature of old growth forests are large dead trees that are home to thousands of life forms. Some, like this pileated woodpecker, visit so-called wildlife trees to find food, shelter, or nest. Others, like fungi and insects, are permanent residents. Old growth forests also play a critical role in tourism. Many of Whistler's most famous trails, like Cheakamus Lake, Ancient Cedars, Rainbow Lake, and Trainwreck, meander through them. But perhaps most important, old growth forests store carbon and reduce the risk of wildfire. Another important plant group in Whistler are berries. These aren't just tasty for humans, but a vital food source for animals like birds and bears. One example is thimbleberry, part of the raspberry family, whose berries can sit on your fingers like thimbles. Some of Whistler's smallest plants are of the non-vascular type. Like all non-vascular plants, mosses don't have roots or the ability to transport food or water any distance. Found in moist environments, like temperate rainforest, mosses are small but mighty. In addition to being beautiful, they're important to soil formation, moisture retention, and nutrient cycling in the forest. Now, let's look at how animals fit into the picture, beginning with vertebrates, animals with a backbone, and the subgroup mammals. Whistler, of course, is named for a large alpine rodent, the marmot, whose loud whistle can be heard high on the mountains. The whistle warns other marmots of approaching danger, like coyotes and grizzly bears, even humans. But if you're skiing or snowboarding in the Alpine, don't expect to hear them. They spend up to 200 days a year hibernating under snow. Moving to the valley, we find another large rodent, the beaver. Beaver dams create ponds that give them easy access to food during winter. These wetlands also provide a home for countless plants and animals and ecosystem services like flood control and water filtration. When you protect beavers, you protect an entire ecosystem. Carnivores also play an important role in healthy ecosystems, in part because they cull old, injured, or sick prey that would otherwise compete with healthier members of those populations for food. Our largest carnivore is the cougar, or mountain lion. This secretive wildcat can be identified by its body-length tail. The smaller bobcat has a stubby tail and is more likely to be seen. Cougars promote plant diversity by keeping deer in check. They also supply a steady stream of food to scavengers like coyotes, ravens, and bears, a critical service during lean times. Speaking of bears, everyone in Whistler knows about bears, or at least think they do. Whistler is home to both black bears and grizzly bears, but the response that each has to humans is quite different. Interestingly, there are more black bears in Whistler now than would occur naturally. That's because as the town developed, supplemental foods like clover and grasses established in open areas like golf courses and ski runs. Citizen scientist Michael Allen, who shot these videos, is Whistler's best source for information on black bears. In 2008, Michael counted 80 adult black bears in Whistler, but in 2018, only 35, a decrease that likely had human causes. Now, unlike black bears, grizzly bears don't prosper around human development. They need large, wild areas with an abundance of seasonal foods like berries, roots, insects, and salmon. Because of this, the presence of grizzly bears is a key indicator of effective stewardship of wilderness areas. A good news story is that grizzly bear numbers appear to be recovering on Mount Sprout and Rainbow Mountain, a feeding and travel corridor for the threatened South Coast grizzly bear population. However, recent trail expansion in these areas have the potential to put the recovery at risk. To meet its commitment to grizzly bear recovery, the community is working to ensure that trail use doesn't undermine the progress that has been made. Now to another group of vertebrates, the most studied animals in Whistler, birds. Through over 30 years of bird surveys, volunteers with the Whistler Naturalists have compiled a checklist of 261 species. The list includes raptors, shorebirds, ducks, game birds, and the largest group, songbirds. Most songbirds are migratory and arrive annually from as far away as South America, bringing music to the Whistler landscape. Here are a couple of examples. The beautiful song of the varied thrush is a sign of spring. The male sings to defend its breeding territory. The American dipper is the only aquatic songbird on the continent. It's unmistakable for its comical bouncing or dipping beside rushing creeks. Birds like American dippers alert us to changes in the environment. Because they require unpolluted water, they're an excellent indicator of when an ecosystem is compromised. Another way ecosystems can be compromised is when non-native species are introduced, a situation we see with Whistler's fish. Whistler resident Eric Crow has done some research on the fish in Alta Lake. He found that cutthroat trout are native, and that the lake was continuously stocked with hatchery rainbow trout for sport fishing as early as 1923. The native cutthroats and hatchery rainbows bred to create hybrids, and with more rainbows introduced each year, cutthroat trout were eventually wiped out. Then, kokanee salmon were introduced, both as a game fish and as a forage fish to fatten up the rainbows for anglers, but the rainbows couldn't grow large enough to eat the kokanee, and the two competed for food. Then later, sterile cutthroat trout were introduced to feed on the native stickleback, a small fish thought to also be competing with rainbows. Turns out the new cutthroats did feed on sticklebacks, growing quite large as a result, and it was these fish, not the intended rainbows, that eventually drew anglers back to Alta Lake. This fishy tale shows that no matter how carefully humans might plan, meddling in natural systems always comes with unintended consequences and is never a good idea. A final group of vertebrates, amphibians and reptiles, have a great story about stewardship. Whistler's best-known amphibian is the western toad, whose annual migration at Lost Lake is an incredible event. In spring, as ice melts away from the shore, adult toads leave the forest for the wetlands beside Lost Lake Beach to lay and fertilize eggs. Females lay an average 12,000 eggs, which hatch into tadpoles that eat algae and help keep the lake clean. The tadpoles leave the water around the end of July as tiny carnivores that eat insects and slugs. About the size of a fingernail, they're vulnerable to predators like garter snakes and birds, as well as humans who might accidentally squash them. Because fewer than 1 in 1,000 toads will live long enough to reproduce, there's a large community effort to protect them during migration, with road closures and trail closures, and volunteers moving toads safely to the forest. The next group of animals we'll look at are small creatures. Though they don't have a backbone, invertebrates are actually the backbone of ecosystems. Did you know that without insects, for example, life on Earth would collapse into chaos? Butterflies and moths are some of the most familiar insects. They are important pollinators and also prey for many animals. Caterpillars are the larval stage of both these groups and just as important as a food source. Like butterflies, dragonflies lack wings in their larval stage, which is spent in the water. Nevertheless, during this time, they are top predators, eating insects, tadpoles, and small fish. Though the larvae can live for years, once dragonflies transform into adults, they fly for only a few weeks before their life cycle ends. Another group of invertebrates have neither legs nor wings. Slugs are decomposers and excrete a nitrogen-rich fertilizer that helps cycle nutrients in the forest. Many of Whistler's snails and slugs, like this chocolate Aryan, are non-native and invasive, introduced through gardening products. And there are hundreds of other invertebrates in Whistler, all with an important role to play in a healthy ecosystem. You might not have thought much about the final kingdom I'll talk about, but its importance cannot be overstated: fungi. Fungi are a critical part of every ecosystem, especially forests. You can remove all the birds and still have a forest, but if you remove all the fungi, a forest will die. Mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of fungi, just like apples are the fruit of apple trees. And like an apple in relation to its tree, a mushroom is tiny compared to its parent, a hidden network of roots known as mycelium. Mushrooms produce spores, the fungal equivalent of seeds, so tiny they drift away like smoke. About half of all fungi are decomposers that live right on their food, like dead trees. Without them, nutrients wouldn't be released back into the ecosystem. The other half of fungi are Michaelrizal, a word used to describe their underground partnership with the roots of living trees and other plants. Fungi provide trees with water and nutrients. In return, trees feed the fungi with sugars from photosynthesis. Research has shown that neighboring trees can communicate and even share food with each other through this underground network of fungi. In fact, small trees are nurtured by larger trees this way and grow up as a community, a family almost. A final group, lichens, are their own kind of thing, leaving scientists puzzled about how to classify them. Lichens are made up of 2 and sometimes 3 different organisms that form a symbiotic relationship for their mutual survival. This relationship always involves a fungus that lives with 1 or more partners that can carry out photosynthesis, like a green alga or cyanobacteria. The fungus provides a home, and the partner provides food. Together, they live where neither could live on their own. Because lichens, like this witch's hair, absorb water and nutrients from the air, they can't survive with high concentrations of pollutants, making them good indicators of air quality. Now let's take a step back from species and look at overall biodiversity. Fellow mammals often get most of our attention, but in Whistler, these represent only 1% of all species. In fact, all vertebrates combined are still the least diverse group. Invertebrates are the most diverse group, followed by fungi, vascular plants, lichens, and non-vascular plants. Since all life is interconnected, this gives us a sense of the huge number of species on which we depend. A food web is a great way to visualize how species are connected. Food webs begin with producers that transform energy from the sun into food. These are eaten by primary consumers, like pikas and tadpoles, who in turn are eaten by secondary consumers, like ravens and martins. Finally, secondary consumers are eaten by top predators, like cougars and coyotes. And then when they die, decomposers step in and the cycle starts again. So knowing how important biodiversity is, how can we protect it in Whistler? This brings us to stewardship, the notion that our enjoyment of nature includes individual responsibility for its care. Whistler has several stewardship groups made up of people, just like you, trying hard to make a difference with limited resources. We've seen how the community takes care of migrating toads, And here's another great example of stewardship. In 1988, the ancient cedars were slated to be logged, but were saved when the community pressured government to recognize their tourism and ecosystem value. Now, it's hard to imagine Whistler without these giants that serve to remind us of both how it was and how it could be. I hope I've been able to give you a greater appreciation of the natural world in Whistler, but don't let the story end here. There are still species to discover, connections to explore, and opportunities to stand up for nature. I'll end with wisdom from Jane Goodall. She suggests that instead of worrying about the harm we're inflicting globally, just act locally and see what a difference you can make.